Hey everyone, this is Pete. Welcome back to Atari ST A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari ST games, some which I grew up with and some which are new to me. Today is actually one of the latter. This is one I didn't play growing up, but sort of the field it was in is something that I'm pretty familiar with. The game in question is called Quest for Galaxia, and in fact all it is really is a Galaxians clone. But it's noteworthy for a few reasons. One is the fact that it was released as a public domain game in 1989, and secondly is the fact that it was released through a label called Budgie UK. Now, Budgie UK was a very well-known shareware and public domain distributor throughout the Atari ST era, and they often partnered with other companies to create public domain libraries and more widely distribute software. So before the age of the internet, we had public domain libraries to distribute software. And the way those worked, if you've never come across them before, is that you would get a catalogue of them, perhaps from a magazine, and then you would order discs. And all you would pay for is the price of the disc, basically the price of duplication. The actual software on them was free, or shareware in some cases. So what this meant was it was a great way for people to build up a library of software without having to pay for it, of being able to share it with friends, and also for developers to distribute their software in a slightly different way. And a lot of people found that quite appealing. I found a quite interesting quote from Jeff Minter of Llamasoft, who was experimenting with the shareware model around this period. And he said, "All commercial games are designed for a theoretical entity known as Darren. Darren is a spotty 14-year-old male who doesn't get on that well with people, so he spends all his time in his bedroom playing games on his computer. Darren is easily impressed by graphics and music, and he doesn't really want to learn anything really tricky. As long as it has ninja hamsters in and works with a Kempston, that's okay. Somehow he can persuade his dad to fork out 25 quid every few weeks for the latest version of R-Type with different graphics on his Amiga. Don't ask me how. Either that or he waits and hits up his mate Wayne for a pirate version in a couple of weeks' time. Consequently, it has become much harder for programmers to retain their creative integrity and earn a living too. It is virtually impossible for a small independent developer to get games out to the people without first hooking in one of the larger companies for distribution and advertising. And those larger companies tend to want stuff that's very normal spaceship and alien stuff. No llamas please, and not too weird. However, with popular disk-based machines, the idea of public domain programs has really come into its own. PD libraries give access to a large amount of free software. PD is usually sub-commercial stuff, often good utilities but without the polish of commercial versions. It would be nice to use the existing PD libraries to distribute software to anyone who is interested, and make a bit of money too. And that is where shareware comes in. And so on. So, the concept of shareware is still around today. It's basically the idea of you download or acquire a piece of software for free. You can normally use it in unlimited form, either for a time-limited period or forever. And then it's up to your own sense of honesty as to whether you pay for it. So the theory is if you use a piece of shareware beyond about 30 days or so, you're kind of morally obliged to pay for it. And in a lot of cases, the registered versions of shareware would offer additional features over and above the standard shareware version. But the crucial thing here was that the original shareware version wouldn't be crippled in any particular way. You'd still be able to use it fully. And public domain was basically a broader concept that incorporated shareware. Most of it was completely free software that people just put out just so they could get noticed. And today's game is one of those examples. It was developed by a guy called Gary Goth Wheaton, who was a pretty prolific public domain creator for the Atari ST, and much of his stuff was distributed via Budgie. And as you'll see, both Gary Wheaton here and Budgie UK became particularly well known for creating clones of classic arcade games, which at the time was kind of regarded as not terribly original and so on, but pretty par for the course in public domain. But today it's actually quite nice to revisit some of these things because they're actually a sort of better interpretation of some of these classic arcade formulae than perhaps the 8-bit machines would have been able to provide. So anyway, this is Quest for Galaxia. Let's go take a look. Okay, here we are with Quest for Galaxia, released by Budgie UK, developed by Goth. Now this is quite a common sort of sight from public domain games at the time, which is that the whole release is very kind of demo scene inspired. So besides providing a competent port of Galaxians in this case, what we've got here is a title screen that's kind of a demo in its own right. So you can just sit here and watch it And you can listen to the music, admire the spectrum analyzer at the bottom, read the scroll text, and just generally have a bit of fun with that. And that was pretty common for public domain. It's not something that happened with commercial software because, well, I mean, commercial software was sort of beholden to publishers and they were sort of obliged to keep doing things as they were supposed to be doing. They were obliged to sort of do what they were told, basically. Whereas in public domain, much like indie games of today, it's sort of the great frontier. They can do whatever they want. And so if they wanted to have a half-hour-long scroll text on their title screen to use up space on a disc, that was their prerogative. They were perfectly free to do that if they wanted to. And in this case, they have done. So, I won't sit here and read out the whole thing. But if you do play this, it's worth having a little look at it, because it's quite an interesting insight into how things were done at the time, the sort of thing you could expect from public domain programmers, the demo scene and all that sort of thing. And plus the music's pretty cool as well. But we're here to actually play some games, so let's press F10 to start, and off we go. So, as I said in the intro, Budgie UK became particularly well known for releasing a lot of pretty competent ports of classic arcade games. So in this case, obviously, we've got Galaxians. Now, it's not exactly the same as Galaxians in a few ways. First of all, we've got the slightly sort of juddery movement, which I'm not entirely sure is a quirk of the programming of the game or if it was deliberate. But if you look at the way things move, they sort of move in spurts. Now, I kind of feel that might have been deliberate, because if you look at the ship at the bottom of the screen, that's moving perfectly smoothly. Whereas everything else is sort of moving in this sort of forward and back kind of motion that makes them just a little bit more unpredictable and a little trickier to actually hit with your shots. Which is nice, because it sort of distinguishes itself from the original Galaxians and means it's not just a straight clone in the first place. So there's a few other little ways that this differs from the original Galaxians and so on. First is the fact that formation at the top of the screen, it always assumes it's the same width, if that makes sense. So what that means is if you shoot the enemies at the sides of it, it doesn't take them longer to get across the screen. They will still move back and forth at the same rate. So it's not like in Space Invaders where you can clear out the ones from the side to give yourself a bit more time to deal with them. In this one, they just move back and forth. So, like, one particular enemy will always be in the same place on the screen. Or covering the same area of the screen, I should perhaps say. But that's fine, because in this game, like, the overall formation doesn't move down the screen. They just fling themselves at you like in Galaxian. So, it doesn't really matter too much. It just gives it a reasonably predictable rhythm to go along with the slightly unpredictable stop-start spurty nature of how the falling ships move. Just, yeah, look at that. That's all over the place, that one, isn't it? And like I say, that doesn't feel like it's sort of a bug or anything. It feels like they're deliberately moving in that way to make them a little bit more difficult to hit. And this one is proving particularly troublesome. Oh! Dead. Right, come on, we're going to get you. My nemesis. One thing I did notice in this game, it takes you ages to respawn for some reason. I think that is partly to ensure that you're never put in a situation where you respawn as something is flying down the screen. But unfortunately, a side effect of that is if you die as something returns to the formation at the top, you then have quite a long wait with precisely nothing happening before you can rejoin the game again. Again, not a major issue, but just a little, whoops, a little bit of a nitpick. But this is the other thing with public domain stuff. A lot of it wasn't perfect. As we heard in Jeff Minter's statement, a lot of stuff is sub-commercial standard, and that's not an insult. A lot of developers turned to public domain because they knew that their stuff wasn't quite as good as a quality as would be expected by commercial software publishers. And that meant you would get little quirks and bugs and things working in unexpected ways, and things working in highly creative ways and that sort of thing as well. So that was part of its charm. Much as people give a lot of praise to the indie scene of today, it was exactly the same sort of thing with public domain back in this era. The developers were free to experiment and do things that wouldn't have been possible to do in the commercial sector. Like, I have quite a vivid memory of one public domain game that I bought from the Page 6 library. It was called Damonoid. And it was a pretty simple shoot 'em up. But for some reason, in between every single level, there was a picture of a lady with her tits out. Oh, that's not my name, is it? Oh, well, it is now. You're going to let me type that in? Petit. There we go. Nice. Right. Let's have another go at that. I quite enjoyed that. So... oh, you can keep shooting on the high score screen. That's quite fun. Alright. F10 play again? Yes. But yeah. So this game Damonoid was a fairly standard shoot 'em up, aside from this digitized picture of a woman with her tits out on every intermission screen. Which I found tremendously embarrassing as a child, because obviously I had no idea that that was there, and obviously my parents being responsible parents and wanting to know what I was up to on the computer at all times, as a good parent should. When I tried this out for the first time and this happened, I was mortified. But looking back on it, that was just one of many examples of developers of public domain software being able to get away with stuff that just wouldn't have flown in commercial software. Can you imagine the outroar? Outrage? Uproar? Outroar. That's my new word for today. Can you imagine the outroar if that had been a commercial piece of software? And like somewhere like The Sun or the Daily Mail had got hold of it and decided that, oh my god, video games are corrupting children because they're showing ladies' boobs between levels. I realised that The Sun was probably an unideal choice of example for that, given the existence of Page 3, but, well, The Sun is not exactly known for being a bastion of quality journalism, so hypocrisy is certainly not beneath them. But anyway, yeah, the point is that sort of thing simply wouldn't have flown in the commercial sector. And thus the only place a developer would have been free to do that sort of thing would have been in the public domain space. They just evidently weren't counting on 10-year-olds getting hold of their software and firing it up in front of their parents. But anyway, there's no boobs in Quest for Galaxia. Not to my knowledge, anyway. This is just a perfectly competent, pretty comfy Galaxians port here. Oh, game over, and we're dead. So, I mean, I think that probably covers everything there is to say about this game. It's a perfectly good Galaxians port. I rather like it, actually. So, yeah, do check it out if you've got access to an Atari ST or some means of playing Atari ST games and you enjoy the old classics. So, I'll just say for now, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue a small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.